Welcome to Cultimatum, the podcast that delves deep into the culture of complexities of cults and human trafficking. I'm your host, Anonymous Andrew. Each week, we explore different facets of cult life and human trafficking, from the psychological manipulation to the brave stories of those who have escaped.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melody. I'm Andrew's co-host. Having experienced the depth of a cult firsthand, specifically the House of Yahweh, I'm here as an advocate for fellow survivors. My journey has inspired me to help others who find themselves in similar situations. This podcast is committed to respecting our guests' privacy. To ensure their comfort and safety, we offer them the option to remain anonymous.
Additionally, we would like to include a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Cultimatum or its affiliates. Cultimatum is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information shared by our hosts and guests. The content discussed on this podcast is based on personal experiences, opinions, and speculation, and should not be construed as professional services or advice. Neither the host nor the guest are assuming liability for any misuse or reliance on the information presented. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and seek professional advice where appropriate.
Before we dive into today's episode, we want to issue a trigger warning. Some episodes may explore explicit and potentially disturbing topics such as sexual abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other sensitive subjects. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults and human trafficking. This episode couldn't be more true because this is our first human trafficking guest. Melody, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Absolutely, Andrew. We've got Elizabeth Quiroz. Did I say that correctly, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay. And she also goes by Liz. Liz is a human trafficking survivor. She's here to share her story with us. And she is now a social worker with a master's in social justice and human rights. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the bravery of coming on, because while we have over the past 6 months approached people in the human trafficking community, they're afraid to come forward because I'm sure there's still people after them. Thank you for your bravery and thank you for coming forward. So where would you like to start?
Well, I want to make sure I just let everybody know, kind of just telling my story so people can see what victims go through, like what they go through as children and what leads them into the entry into being trafficked. And so it's super important to see the big picture and also to know that there's hope for individuals like me that, we're in that life, but once we are out and we reclaim our power, that we can do something different and that there's hope for us. And so whatever the stuff I am going to say and talk about can be triggering. So if anybody's listening, they get triggered, it's okay to step to another room, take a break, or shut your laptop or whatever you're doing, take a break and then come back.
We do have a trigger warning at the beginning, so they're forewarned. But yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so for me, my trauma started at the age of 4 years old. I endured physical abuse and sexual abuse. And so I grew up in a single parent household, and my father, I didn't have a father in my life. I mean, he was there here and there, but he wasn't there for me that a daughter needed her father, especially when you're living in poverty and you're, growing up with a family of alcoholic addicts, gang members, and criminals. And so when you come from that background, you need all the mentors and the father figure and the mother figure. You need all of that in your life as a child growing up. So I didn't have that. And so because of that trauma that started at a young age, I started to, develop these suicidal tendencies. Like I would cut my arm, or I would sniff nail polish, or I would put belt around my neck so I can hurt myself. And I wasn't trying to take my life. I was more like trying to hurt myself to where I can end up in the hospital so somebody can love me, somebody can pay attention to me. And so I was doing self-harm activities so I can look for love. And children shouldn't have to go through that.
No.
And so that's what I went through when I was in my single parent household. And then eventually, because of the physical abuse that continued to happen to me growing up, I was placed in the foster care system. And so when I was in this home, it was also abusive. Like I didn't feel safe in this home as well. So I ended up just running away from the foster care system, from, my parent, the one single parent I was with. And I also just felt like if I went with my dad, that, so I was with my mom, if I went with my dad, that I would feel safer. And so eventually I did go with my dad, but he was an alcoholic. So he wasn't able to be there for my needs or help me, or I came with all this. I had depression, I had PTSD, I was angry, I had I was suicidal, I had all these things I was going through. So I was with him I think I was 15 years old when I went to his house, and I had all these problems I was going through, and he wasn't able to support me. And so I remember going to high school and, ditching all my classes. I had bad grades. I started hanging out with older men. Like I started to hang out with gangs. And so these are all signs that when adolescents are doing these things at school, and they're failing their classes, or they're running away at night, or they're hanging out with older people, like these are all red flags that something's going on. And so eventually I ended up meeting an older man when I was in front of my dad's job. And so, like I said, my dad, even though I was with him at that time, like that's all those years that I was with my mom, I felt like I wanted to be with my dad because that's what was going to make me happy. But when I finally got with him, it didn't. And so when I met this older man in front of my dad's job, he told me, he said, "Hey, you're beautiful. You're gorgeous. Like, what is your name? Can I get your number?" So he said all these things to me that really caught my attention. That really kind of like it lured me into a relationship with him, because I didn't have attention like that growing up. And so by the time I was with my dad, it was in San Francisco, Daly City. And so I originally was, when I was growing up with my mom, it was in Sacramento. And so eventually, like I said, I went with this man and I started hanging out with him, and then he lured me into being groomed. So he started to give me drugs. He started to take me to hotel rooms. There's a lot of like sexual trauma that started to happen. And so I thought it was a relationship, but it was being groomed. It was being lured into trafficking, and he was prepping me for what he was going to do. And it's also because he was 27. I was 15. I was a child. So, and it's also still rape, but what the things that was happening.
Yeah.
And so eventually I ran away with him. I felt like if I ran away with him and run away from my dad's and go with this man, that I was going to be able to have my needs met with him. And so I remember when I went with him, it was like 2:00 in the morning. I had packed up my stuff and I left. And then it started to get really abusive. It started to get really aggressive. He started to get physical. He told me that we needed to make money because now I was with him, and we needed to find ways to make money. So he took me to 16th and Mission. And this is where he started to have me be like a drug mule. So at this point, I was, 15 turning 16. And so a drug mule is somebody that's holding on to drugs on areas of their body. So he would have me hold on to drugs for him while he was making the transactions to the clients on the streets. So we were selling crack at that time. And so I remember when I was holding on to the drugs and he was selling the crack, and then there was other homeboys that he had downtown with us. So he was part of a prison gang. And so I remember being down there with these men, and if I looked up at another man, he will slap me in front of these men and degrade me and embarrass me in front of them. So I was trained to look down on the floor. So that's another red flag that you want to look out for if you are working with a trafficking victim, that if they're constantly looked down on the floor, you can tell that something's going on, that they've been trained that way. So we need to ask questions on why they're looking down on the floor. So for years, for me, when I grew up and I was in and out of correctional facilities, around probation officers, around parole officers, I could not look them in the eye. I always looked down on the floor because that's what I was trained to do. So I was told that if I look at a man in the eye, that means that I'm their property. So I did not want to look another guy in the eye because I was not their property. And so that's why I had that concept for so long. But none of the officers knew this. They just assumed because I was a criminal or I was an addict that I was just not looking at them. But in reality, I was a victim of trafficking. So that's why it's super important that we get educated about the signs. So
I love that you're offering that information up.
Yeah, it's important.
It is.
And so when I was out there on 16th and Mission, yeah, so when I was out there, he was training me to look down on the floor. And so there was a time that he got arrested and he sent a woman to me. So a woman can be a trafficker as well. But we have to be mindful that at some point in her life, she was trafficked too. So usually when traffickers are women, they were victimized and they no longer want to be victimized. So they will step in that role as a perpetrator so they don't have to be victimized. So we just have to like have that mindset when we're dealing with these individuals. So we can, yeah, there's consequences, but let's get them resources too. Let's get them help and see what's going on. And so when this woman came to me, she told me, she said, hey, your boyfriend's locked up. He wants me to help you make money. So I'm thinking in my head, we were going to rob people or sell drugs. And she said, we're going to make money this way. So she told me I was going to sleep with men. So I'm 16 years old. I'm like, no, I don't want to sleep with men. I don't want to do that. And she said, well, you have no choice. That's part of the streets. It's part of the rules. This is what we have to do to survive. And so, and at this point, I was tiny. I was a tiny 16-year-old girl. And she was a grown adult. Like, she was way bigger than me. So I was scared. And when I was out there, I was super scared about everything that happened to me. But it's like I eventually became hard. My heart became hard. And I had to really like defend myself and become rough around the edges because I had to protect myself. You know, I remember one time when I was 19 years old, I was arrested for a weapon charge. And I remember being in court and the judge told me, you are a danger to society, because I had a knife on me, right? And I said, well, and I was in my head thinking, wait, hold on. You're calling me a danger when I was raped all those times on the streets? Like, you don't know my situation. I had to carry a knife to protect me. But I didn't tell him that. But I was thinking that in my head, like, how dare this judge say I'm a danger when I was a victim the whole time and I was being sold on those streets? That's why I carried a knife. So that's why we have to understand why victims do things like this. Why does children carry knives? Why do they carry guns? Like, what is the reasoning on why they do what they do? Why do kids get into gangs? Like, we need to ask these questions so we can intervene and see what resources that can help them, you know? And so eventually when I was with this lady and she told me what I had to do, I said, okay, well, it is what it is. I have to do what I have to do because I was afraid and I felt like I had no other choice. It was either this or go back to my abusive home. So I ended up being sold to these men. And so she would take me to 16th and Mission, 17th and Cap, and 20th and Shotwell. And these are the blades, the tracks in San Francisco. So a blade is where it's a strip of street. It's a strip where people are taken there and they're sold for sex. And so that's what a blade in a track is called. And so that's where she took me. And so I remember there was times where I would have the purchasers. So purchasers are somebody that purchases sex, that, you know, pays for sex. So the old term before was John, and now we call them purchasers or buyers. And so I remember I had a purchaser drop me off to a different location after he finished raping me. He dropped me off at a different location. I had the money and I kept, because I didn't want to go to where she was at because I wanted to keep the money for myself, because I realized that she was taking my money. So when I disappeared to a different direction and didn't go to where she was at, she called me, she said, where's my money? I'm like, this is my money. I earned this money. This is supposed to be for me. I'm supposed to be taking care of my boyfriend. I'm supposed to be taking care of myself. This is my money. But she ended up taking my money. So it was like I was being played, and that's how I felt. And I felt like I was being used and played. And so this is like the terms that we use when we're out there on the streets. And so eventually he got out. And when he got out, I told him what happened. And he said, well, if you did it for her, you can do it for me. So he took me back out there to the same corners that she took me at. And then he said, well, because you love me, show me how much you love me. Show me your loyalty. And that's all a child wants to do, right? They just want to show their love so they can get love back. They just want to show their loyalty so they can get that loyalty back. That's a lot of reasons why kids get into gangs, because they want loyalty. They want a sense of family. They want a sense of love. And so when he said that to me, I said, yeah, I love you. I'll show you my loyalty. I'll do that for you. So he basically took me back out there and continued to sell me to these purchasers in cars. And so there was multiple times that something bad could have happened where they could have killed me and dumped me somewhere and nobody would even noticed. Like, my body would have just been up in a ditch somewhere and nobody would even notice that I was missing or I was gone, because there was no missing report on me. I was just out there from the age of 15 to 19. So it was like I was just out there on the streets.
Did you realize how dangerous it was at the time, Liz, or is this something that you realize more in hindsight?
I think when I was out there, I was on survival mode. So I was in survival mode and I was past that point. I couldn't let myself think that this was dangerous, because if I did that, I was going to go back to being scared. And I had to make myself be tough. I had to make myself be strong so I can be out there surviving. And so that's why it's so literally I had to like dissociate out of my body multiple times. When I was in those cars being sold, I had to dissociate. I had to leave my body and not be present in that car when those things were happening to me. And then I also had to learn how to become different people. Like I had to use different aliases. Like for example, I was out there selling drugs too. So my name was Beth, the drug dealer. I also had a name Sabrina. When I was being sold to purchasers, I was Sabrina. I had a name Lizette because there was other times where I was, I did get jobs here and there working as a busser. So my name was Lizette. So I had different names, and then my name was Liz. So I had multiple names. And so I had different aliases, and I had to learn how to be different people. So it's like, there's so much out of body experience and dissociation that you have to do while you're being trafficked. A lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma. And so when I was with so when he got out and he put me at those corners, it just started this journey of me of being on drugs. So I was on drugs for about 12 years. I could not be sober doing this. And so I was on meth for 12 years. I was in and out of correctional facilities. I want to say my first case was when I was 16 years old. I did a robbery case under my first trafficker. And so when I remember getting out and then just being on the streets, and then at 19 I was arrested again, and that's when I mentioned about the judge saying I was a danger to society. And then I ended up getting arrested again and went to prison. And so got out, kept going back and doing time. And so a lot of the times my cases were because it was under my traffickers. A lot of my charges were because I was under my trafficker doing crimes. And so my third trafficker, I ended up meeting the third one. And this was more of a labor trafficking form. And so this is called it's labor trafficking. And what he would do is he would give me drugs to sell. He would give me meth to sell, like up to a half a pound of meth to sell for him. And so when he gave me the proposition, say, hey, you're going to sell this drugs for me, and all you have to do is bring me back, just get all this drugs off in 5 days, bring the money back to me, and then I'll give you more. So when he gave me that proposition, I thought that was the route for me. It was either this or go be sold at the corners, right? So I felt like this was a safer route, but it's still modern day slavery. It's still trafficking, but I didn't know that. And plus I had an addiction. So I was supplying my own addiction. And so he would give me the drugs, and I would constantly get myself more in debt with this man. And he was part of a gang as well. So he had all these connections, and I was afraid. While I was selling drugs for him, I was still afraid because that's somebody you don't mess with, right? And so I remember I would bring the money to him, and he would he'll give me drugs, and I would just continue that cycle. And then every time I got arrested, I would get out and be in debt with him. Or every time I got robbed, I would be in debt with him because that's his drugs. Or I will smoke my own supply and then be in debt. So like there was always something where I was always in debt with him. So I always had to continue to sell drugs to pay off this debt I owed. And of course there was consequences. There was times where he kidnapped me. There was times where I would meet him, give him his money, he'll give me drugs, but I had to perform oral sex, or I had to give sex before I can leave the car. So there was just so many things that I had went through with this man before I can get my freedom. And so at the age of 26, I remember being arrested for the last time, and my son was, because I just had a son. Even I had a baby, and I was still using throughout my whole pregnancy. And I was still selling drugs, being trafficked throughout my pregnancy. I want to say maybe when I was like in the early stages of my pregnancy, I stopped selling drugs. So I was just using at that point, but I still couldn't get off the drugs. And so when I gave birth to I got clean the month before giving birth to him. And then I was able to give birth to my son. And then I just took him back to that lifestyle. I took him back to that lifestyle because that's all I really knew. And that's what I was used to. And so, and I thought that's how I can make money was sell drugs again to make money. And so I went back to that life. And then that's where I got arrested at 26, and he was 3 months old. And that was my wake-up call.
Liz, during 15 to 26, so that's almost 10 years, you were arrested. I lost count. It seemed like 6 times or something. There was no time a social worker or a public defender or somebody that looked at you and said that you're not a criminal, you're a victim? They
No.
couldn't
Mm-mm.
make that jump, the
No.
connection.
So I remember there was times where there was a lady, and her name is she's the sheriff of San Mateo County. Her name is Christina Corpus. So she was the officer inside when I was incarcerated at the jail in San Mateo. She was one of the officers that pulled me out of my cell, and she would talk to me and tell me, "Hey, you have so much potential. You're super young. What are you doing?" So that she was like the only one I wanted. And another gentleman named Brother Marty, who was a pastor, he will pull me out of my cell too to talk to me. But besides that, no DAs, no attorneys, no arresting officers. Nobody asked me questions on why I did what I did or what happened or what got me to that point. My last arrest, when I was arrested for selling drugs, they asked me, "Who are you working for?" Even the other arrests that I've been arrested for, they always asked me, "Who are you working for?" Right? And that right there should have been a red flag that there's some trafficking going on. If they're asking me, "Who are you working for?" But I in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell you because I'm not going to tell, so that's why a lot of the times I did the time. But my last arrest, I ended up working with the police and told them the truth. So my last arrest, because I realized that I needed to do something for my son. I had a son that I needed to think about. So I ended up letting the police know, okay, you know what? This is who I'm working for. And so, but nothing came, like they didn't support me, gave me resources, nothing. They got the information for me and then threw me in jail and threw away the keys, basically.
The system is broken.
Yeah.
This is just heartbreaking. The fact that this was in the state of California.
Yeah.
As usual, speechless. I just can't imagine that somebody didn't look at this young lady and say, how at 17 is she prostituting or selling meth or crack on the streets? Because and this was recently. How many years ago was this?
So my last arrest was in 2011. So it's been a while.
Yeah, so it's modern day.
Yeah.
So, Melody, I'm going to say it because we've done all these episodes on the cults and how the law enforcement is looking the other way. And now I'm seeing it's happening in human trafficking. I don't understand how you bring a 16, 17-year-old in off the streets who's clearly a junkie or addicted to drugs and or prostituting themselves, but they can't be doing it of their own volition, not at 16 or 17 or 18. Even somebody has to open their eyes and go, this picture doesn't make sense.
We were talking about this off mic, and I'm just going to say again how the similarities are that these cult leaders and these pimps, these drug dealers, they all have that in common, that they purposely target young people who are vulnerable, they try to find a void that you have, and they convince you they can fill this void, and then they get you in this, and then they exploit you once you're there. Absolutely.
Yeah, so my third trafficker was, I think it was from the age of, I want to say 20 to 26, my third trafficker. Because I was with my first one, I met him at 15 years old. And then the female, she was in between. Like she came, right when he went to jail, she came in the picture, but then she left. So then it was mainly him, my first one. And then I met my third one when I was around, I want to say 20. Yeah.
I don't know if we're up to that part, but you had mentioned prior to us recording that you have a book. You've written a book?
Yes.
This book is your autobiography or the story of this, or what is?
It's my bio. It's my biography. Yes.
This should be reading for lawyers and prosecutors and public defendants and social workers. They've got to recognize the signs.
Yeah.
Bringing in, and I'm sure there's a lot of young men, because there's a whole gay side of this where men are trafficked for the gay sex. It's on both sides. I don't understand how it just seems to me that somebody has to open their eyes and say, there's something wrong with this picture. She keeps every 6 months, she's in here again.
constantly in and out. It's like a revolving door. So that's what I'm saying. Like when officers, that's why we need to train more of the officers, because when they come across a trafficking victim, they're going to see the signs. Like obviously I was a drug runner and I had a bigger connection. So they were asking me who you're working for. So they will want to know before, okay, of course you want that information of who's the bigger fish, right? Who's the bigger connection. But then you want to ask, okay, why are you doing this? What happened? Did they force you? Or did they put fear in you? Did they control you? Did they say they're going to kill your family? Like they should have asked more questions rather than just saying, oh, thank you for the permission. Now let me take you to jail. You know, it's like there needs to be more resources and more.
So giving up your dealer or giving up your pimp or giving up somebody, the big fish, you didn't get immunity. You didn't get time.
No. I wasn't given any resources. And that's the thing. I was given 5 years. They slammed me with 5 years. So I ended up doing my time. And that's what I'm saying. Like they should have gave me resources while I had to like search the resources for myself to get the support I need. I got myself out of that life.
Yeah, you pulled yourself out. But that was a rock bottom for you. Yeah. Where you had a 3-month-old child. And I thank God that you did hit rock bottom then. And so this child was not brought into this world, because they would have trafficked her. Yeah. Was it a she?
I had my son. So I had him in the life. Yeah. When I was doing everything I was doing when I was selling drugs and being trafficked, I had him in that life. I did. And so that's what I'm saying about, I'm really grateful that's why I needed to wake up and I needed to do something different. So when I change my life around, my son can have a fighting chance. So I look at it as a miracle. I look at it like God was looking out for me when I got arrested, so I can change my life. You know, my son can have a chance.
I'm just curious. This is like a little bit off the beaten path, but I don't know how much it's parallel with your story. Was there any child pornography involved along the way here? Did you see that?
Yes. So child pornography was something, I was involved in porn growing up, you know, because that was something I was watching. But for like, when I was 16 years old, I want to say 16, maybe 16, it was one of my purchasers. And so what he did, it was like, no, I wasn't extremely heavy. I wasn't in porn, like child porn, like for years or for days or anything like that. It was a one-time experience. So for me, when I was being trafficked when I was being trafficked and I was being sold to one of my purchasers, he was taking pictures of me and he ended up keeping those films. And so, and then I ended up sending those films to the prisons for my trafficker. So those pictures of me were inside the prisons, and you don't know who my trafficker was showing those pictures to. Right. Number one. And then number two, my purchaser kept a binder, an album, so he put my pictures in those albums.
I'm just gonna.
My head is spinning because
that was a one situation thing. So it wasn't like it was a you know what I mean, like years or days or months. It was a one time experience. So I did have a little experience with that.
I'm just gonna back up here a little bit, Andrew, and I think that some of this law enforcement, the same with the cults, is that they kind of wash their hands of it and try to use the thing while these people are in this willingly. The same with the cults, that, well, we can't go after these cult leaders because these people are in this willingly, and they don't consider the brainwashing that goes on, the coercion, the gaslighting, the manipulation, all of the things that are going on behind the scenes, because even the person might think they're doing it willingly at the time, because of the situation that they're in. It's not until they remove themselves and they can look back on it and go, I really didn't think I had a choice. So I was doing it willingly, but I didn't think I had a choice. So that's how I think law enforcement.
And I agree with that.
Hands. Yeah. I'm not saying it's right.
I agree with that 100%. I think, I'm sure Liz and everybody that she knew didn't think she had a choice, because number one, she was addicted to the drugs, so she needed them. And this is all she knew. She came from a broken foster home, which right there is government run. So foster families are supposed to be vetted. So the system is broken right there.
Right.
I got to stop watching TV, but I'm watching either true crime stories or stuff, and where they're going after misdemeanor stuff. And I'm not going to tell the story now, but 20-something years ago, right up to 9/11, I told the story about where they were pulling people over for not wearing a seatbelt. They used 20 state troopers and they were doing a massive seatbelt check. I wrote an article into the editorial to my local newspaper, and I was like, "Are you shitting me? This was 3 months after 9/11. You don't have something better to do with these 20 state troopers where they could be guarding the water supply or the nuclear reactors or no, they were ticketing people not wearing the seatbelt or using their cell phones. That law enforcement resources, I don't want to hear them say, "Oh, we don't have enough money for that," because that's the first thing they'll say to you. We don't have the budget.
Mm-hmm.
But you have enough to put 20 cars on the side of the expressway to pull people over for not wearing a seatbelt. They should be.
Yeah,
I'm going to go off on a rant.
Reprioritizing. So Liz, I assume that being in jail is what was able to get you sober. Is that correct? And how did that transpire for you, and what happened after you got out?
Yeah, so I like I said, when I was arrested that last time, that's when I realized I needed to do something different and I needed to fight for my son. And so I did I got the 5 years. I did 18 months out of the 5 years. And I want to say towards the end of my term, I decided I wanted to go for my education, and I wanted to do a program called Starting Point. That was because I was in San Mateo, and then I got transferred to Sonoma County, and this is where I wanted to, heal from my trauma, learn about addiction, and do something different. Learn tools, parenting tools. And so I did Starting Point when I was in custody. And then I also did a program called it was a GED, so it was for my my general education. So I ended up completing and getting my GED, and I completed the program and got my certificate for completed Starting Point. And when I was being released, they told me, and they said, you need to go to another rehab, another women's facility, because you have a lot of trauma. And so I took their suggestions. And so when I was released, I went to another program called Women's Recovery Services. And that's where I learned about being a victim of trafficking. I remember being in group, and they told me to be super honest about my story. So I said, okay, this is my honest. I'm being transparent and honest about everything, because I didn't talk about it when I was in the other program because I was embarrassed. I thought it was my fault. I had a lot of shame. I didn't want people to look at me like a hoe. Right. Those are really bad words, but I'm just saying I don't want people that. And so, but I needed to be honest because I wanted to do something different. And so when I shared my story, the counselor said, hey, it's not your fault. Like, you're a trafficking victim. There's no such thing as a child prostitute. So when she told me that, I felt so much relieved. Like, I felt like as if this burden just got off my shoulder, and I felt so much freedom by her telling me that. So I felt embraced and empowered to share more of my story. So because of that experience, I was motivated to, and in completing the program and in changing, like starting to grow and learning how to walk all over again, because I was in sobriety now, like I was in recovery. So I had to learn to do everything different. And so I ended up going to school. I went to Santa Rosa Junior College and ended up going for my associate's degrees. I got 3 associate's degrees. Graduated with highest honors. So I'm the first one in my family to graduate, first generation.
Congratulations.
I ended up going to Sonoma State. Thank you. I went to Sonoma State, got my bachelor's degree. And that's where I got my master's. After that, I got my master's in social justice and human rights with distinction. So I graduated with a 4.0.
Wow.
And then, so I mean, who does that? Like, I'm like, you know what? This is just crazy. Like,
because underneath all of that, you were a smart, brilliant, intelligent woman. You were just being manipulated. I have two questions for you. Yes. One of them is going to open up a can of worms. And I invite anybody who's in this. Well, let me ask the question first. Along this journey from 16, 15 to 26, you must have run across law enforcement that were corrupt. So cops were involved. Yep, she's shaking her head. Yes.
Not involved with my trafficking, but they were involved with the problem. They were not educated. So every time they arrested me, or they arrested me, or if I came across them, they treated me like a criminal. They treated me as not human and as a criminal. So I didn't have any compassion or remorse. And there was no resources or no support for me to get out of it.
Well, I'm referring, okay, that as horrible as that is, I'm looking to see if again, I'm watching too much TV. Were there device or special victims unit cops that were on the take, that they were being paid off by the drug dealers.
That happens.
Thank you.
Law enforcement can be involved in doing. Anybody can be the ones that are purchasing or traffickers or be traffickers.
Right.
It can happen. Yes.
How did you get clean and sober?
That my last arrest, when I got arrested by under my third trafficker, that's when I realized, and I got that 5-year prison term. That was my wake up call. That was when I decided I needed to get clean.
12 steps, or there's something in the prison that you went to, or there was a religious aspect to it, or spiritual aspect?
So I completed the program inside the jail, which was it wasn't 12 step. It was more like it wasn't 12 step. It was more like a self-help program. And so when I completed that program, I went to Women's Recovery Services, and that's a 12-step program.
Okay.
And so I completed the steps, worked with a sponsor, an NA sponsor.
Good.
And this is where they connected me with God. And I started and I knew of God growing up. I knew, I've heard of him. I just, ran away from him for so long because the God I knew about was very punishing. And if I sinned, I was going to go to hell, so much religion. Like, I didn't want that. And so I found God and have a relationship with him on my own. And so now I know that that's not how God is. So basically when I got connected with the rooms, I started building a relationship with God. And so I wanted to do different. I started sharing my story more. I started to, get spiritual mentors. Like, I had a sponsor, but now I have spiritual mentors in my life. And I just started to walk this healing journey of advocacy, of using my pain for a purpose, walking with God and having a relationship with my sisters that are also survivors. Me and my partner, sister Lisa, we both co-founded Redemption House of the Bay Area. And we are an established 501c3 here in Sonoma County, and we're serving trafficking victims. We're helping them reclaim their lives to do something different. And we're helping everyone all over the Bay Area. And we're sharing our stories to bring awareness, and it brings us healing when we do this.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I have 9 years sober, so I'm very familiar with your journey.
Yes.
And in order to keep it, you got to give it away. I get all that. How do you help the women? Is the law enforcement now bringing them to your organization, or do you actually go out and find them?
We have a street outreach we do once a month. So we go to the streets looking for trafficking victims. We promote it on social media. Word of mouth. We help when we do presentations in the community, and survivors will come up to us after our presentations because we share our stories, and they'll say, "Hey, I didn't know I was a trafficking victim, but because you shared your story, I can relate."
Right.
And so we invite them to our support group. So we meet twice a month at our office. And this is where the women come, and we help them, and we support them in this group, and they bring their other survivor sisters. So it's like word of mouth, and it's just expanding. And during our outreach, that's when we actually go there and meet them on the streets, bring them resources, gift cards, purses, and just support them. And they know us by the purse ladies. They're like, "Oh, here comes the purse ladies," because they know that relationship we have purses, and we support them, and we meet them where they're at. So we have different avenues on how we reach trafficking victims.
That's amazing.
I'm very happy to hear that part of it, because the people who don't know that there is help or hope, when they hear it from somebody who's walked the walk, and if you go out, even if you help one person a week or one person a month, that's one less person. I have a question that I don't know that you can answer, but I don't know if anybody has the Ring camera system, but I have Ring camera, and at least once a week, you get a little post on the Ring cam, because it's a community, and they'll say missing juvenile, 13 years old, and they have a picture of her. And the first thing that goes through my head is that she's been kidnapped or she's been trafficked. Of course, she could be a runaway. I saw one today. There was a Latina, a 13-year-old Latina, missing juvenile. And I'm wondering if they're snatching them off the streets. Did you see a lot of that?
So trafficking, a lot of the times there's this conception or this vision that trafficking happens where there's a white van, right? White van comes and just snap the kids off, throw them in the van, or they're being transported from one country to another. I mean, it happens in those type of ways, but it's usually within Interfamilial pimping, which is within the family, or relationships. That is like, I want to say a lot of the trafficking victims we come across is through relationships, through people they know, through friends, or through boyfriends, or through girlfriends.
Right.
So it happens through Romeo pimping, or it can be CEO pimping, which is through the internet. So children, youth are being lured through the internet and it's like there's this term called phishing, right? Or catfish. So individuals are catfishing, pretending to be somebody younger, but when the youth meets them, they're an older grown man, and then bam, and then
they grab them. Yeah,
they're grabbed, and so it's happening that way. Or there's also there's CEO pimping, Romeo pimping, gorilla pimp. Oh, gorilla pimping. So that happens within Romeo pimping, or it can happen with CEO pimping, because gorilla is more violent and it's more, but it can happen, like I say, it can happen in relationships too. And so there's different versions of ways that people are lured to trafficking. It's not always the white van or being transported. Like, have you watched the movie Taken?
Yes.
Okay, like being transported from like being kidnapped and transported to a different country. It doesn't happen always like that. It's like within people in
That's
our
actually
own,
probably the smallest portion of victims that happens to, wouldn't you say, Liz?
Yeah, it happens here in our own communities. Yeah.
But the smallest portion is the white van, or the kidnapping idea is the smallest portion of human trafficking victims, most likely.
It can happen. It can happen, but that's not how mainly it happens.
Right. It's not the most common form.
Yeah, that Taken. That's with Liam Neeson, one of my favorite actors. But I've seen that movie multiple times. Yeah,
and that's not the mainly how it happens either. So I'm like, we have to just make sure we just do these webinars. If you do trafficking, there's Trafficking 101, there's webinars like Redemption House. If you look us up, we offer trainings too, where we can show you different ways of how it can happen domestically, how it happens here.
How can from your perspective, and I see that you are not only an advocate but an activist, and you're doing everything you can with this organization, but how can we fix this broken foster care system? I don't know if I think I'm putting you on the spot. So I don't mean to do that, but
well,
in your opinion, what needs to be done?
I feel like background checks. I feel like I think they're doing that now, especially in the field I'm working in. I'm hearing that foster parents are having background checks, and that's before that. When I was in foster care, it wasn't like that.
Right.
There needs to be like, so I'm hoping that all states are making sure that foster parents are doing background checks to make sure that there's nobody's in the sex registry system, or nobody has a past of abusing children. Like, we don't want to put someone that's registered sex offender to go be a foster parent, or somebody that's has a past of children being removed, or a past of being abused or abusing others. We don't want them to like be foster parents if they have that past. Like, we just want to make sure we do thorough backgrounds. And we want to make sure that these parents have proper trainings. They're not just being foster parents overnight. That they do trainings they learn about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. They learn about intervention models, prevention models. They learn about the cultural aspect of where these children are coming from. Like, it's going to be hard. For example, if somebody's indigenous, right? They're coming from an indigenous background. They have their cultural aspects. You put them in a Caucasian home that doesn't understand their culture. It's going to be very traumatic, because it's like, how do you, it's like blending the two. It's hard. So you have to like understand what the culture that the children you're receiving in their culture. It's important to understand that. And so I just think a lot of training, a lot of background checks.
Well,
yes.
Okay, so let's say that they start doing more background checks. Is it, but what I hear over and over again, and again, it might be from TV, but I hear it everywhere, is that CPS, Child Protective Services, is overworked. Like, they don't have enough. Is that part of the problem too?
That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem too. But I feel like because they feel they're desperate for more workers, they're just hiring anybody.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that's why when you hire anybody that's just coming in, they're not going to put their passion and really care for these children. So they really need to make sure they're hiring people that are passionate about helping children, about helping families, about the whole person care. And that's true. Sometimes, like, when they're overworked, they're just kind of like, oh yeah, I did that home visit. So that they're just saying they did it, but they actually didn't.
Yeah.
And so But we also need to make sure the social workers that are in that are doing these home visits are trained on how to look out for when parents are loaded, or when there's red flags or there's red signs. What do you look out for? They need to be properly trained when they go and do these home visits.
I just want to give the system a little bit of credit here, because I'm going to say what they did right, which was offering to put you on a path of education and offering you the long-term rehab resource as you came out of prison. Because I think not that you should have to go to prison to get those resources, but that is something that the system did right for you, and it put you on that path to get you back on track. So I know we're dogging the system a little bit, but I just want to point out there were some things that were done right, especially in particular with you, for somebody who was able to take advantage of those resources and use it to your advantage. You grabbed onto that lifeline and you hung on tight and you used it to pull yourself out of that hole. And I just want to give you the credit for taking that lifeline and doing that and using that to put your life back together for yourself and your child.
That's true. And so, but that's the thing there. Like, it's good to have these resources, and those resources helped me. But for somebody that's like, doesn't have that mindset, and they're coming from a broken past, or they're being trafficked, and they don't know how to like go those resources, they're going to be stuck in that cycle. So it's kind of like, we got to make it easier for them. Put it so they can have it.
And Melody, well, I agree with you. And she got the help at 26, but why did it have to take that long? Why, when she was arrested at 16 or 17, somebody should say, hey, there's a minor here who's prostituting herself. She's hooked on drugs. We need to swoop in and take her out and
agreed. Yes.
Save her. Even if it's against her will. Let's say that you fight and kick. No, I'm because you're hooked on drugs and you're afraid that you're not going to get your next fix. But somebody should be saying, it's a 16-year-old child, and she's out there selling her body. I agree. I agree, Andrew. There needs to be more. I think that's about 10 years too, educating law enforcement and having more resources available.
And just to let you know that they are coming around, and so that's why we do what we do, because we want to educate everybody. We're seeing more law enforcement stepping up, and they're doing their job. So I'd like to just, in the event that a law enforcement personnel is listening to us, we'd love to hear your side of the story anywhere in the United States. If you're in Vice or just in law enforcement and you have any input on this, I'd like to hear your side of the story, because I blame the system for this. Liz, you've been out. I'm sorry, I don't know how old you are now. So you've been out how many years? Since 2011. So I want to say going on 14 years in October.
Okay. So tell us more about the programs that you're running now. Let's give them a little promotion and tell us what you're doing now, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so me and my partner, sister, so I want to make sure it's my partner's sister. Her name's Lisa Diaz McQuaid. So we're both the co-founders of an organization called Redemption House of the Bay Area here in the Bay Area. And so we serve human trafficking victims. We've been established since we founded in 2018, but became established in 2020. And so we've just been doing work for the last, 5 years? It's been about 5 years, or more than that, like 6 years. We've been doing a lot of work, around the human trafficking movement. And so what I'm doing today is I'm a full-time mama. I have a son. Well, my husband has 4 kids. I have 1. So we have a blended of 5. I'm a grandma. I'm married. I have a home. I received a governor's pardon, so my whole criminal record is completely gone.
Good.
So I'm the first one in Sonoma County, first lady in Sonoma County to receive a governor's pardon. I'm still in school. I'm getting my doctorate degree.
Good.
In Christian leadership and ministry leadership. Yes, and so I just living life, life, and embracing all the good stuff.
That laugh tells it all, because as tragic as your story is, at least at the end, there's happiness and you're living the good life or a good life, and you're helping others.
Yeah. Yes. And you know what's crazy? Like when we do a lot of speed engagements, we always say, because people ask us, how come people just don't get out? Well, it's not that simple. Like
Right.
it's hard to get out of that life when you have that mindset and when you're stuck in the mindset of poverty, right? Or when you're stuck in a relationship where you think it's love and it's not love. And when you think your worth is not, like you don't have any worth, and you feel like, oh, well, I'm not worth anything. I'm not worth a degree, or I'm not worth having a family. I'm not worth, getting married. I'm not worth any of the good stuff. So you feel like you're just low. So you stay stuck. So I never knew I could do any of this in my life I'm doing today. So if I would have known that sooner, I probably would have worked towards or grabbed the resources sooner, but I didn't know. So that's why it's really important that people understand there is a good life like this. Like you can do something different with your life. You can have a good life. You can have a happy life. It's just learning how to get on that path,
Right.
out of that cycle.
And you're offering that
Okay.
hope to the other survivors that you're reaching out to. You're being the advocate that you wish
Well, you're an
somebody had
example.
been for you. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out, Liz, is I want to thank you so much for educating Andrew and I and the audience on a lot of the red flags and the terminology, things that, we aren't aware of. And it's good for us to know those things, learn those things, because that's going to help break those cycles too. Just making people aware, just the average citizens aware of what we should be looking for too, because we all need to be doing our part. So I appreciate that, and you educating us and letting us know those things as well.
Tell us where we can find you on social media.
So I am under Quiroz Elizabeth 2015. And then you can also look up Redemption House of the Bay Area on Instagram. So those are all my handles on Instagram. And then also you can find me on Facebook under Miko Elizabeth Quiroz. So MICO Elizabeth Quiroz. And you can also find Redemption House of the Bay Area on Facebook as well.
Okay. And
we will
get
have
that
all
information to Melody.
Yes.
I will.
Yes. Give me all those links and we will put those in the show notes for sure.
Thank you. I would just encourage everybody to get more educated and that there's hope.
You are an example of that hope. So
yes.
Thank you.
For sure. Thank
you,
Liz,
you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And what's the name of your book?
It's called A Purified in the Flame.
Purified in the Flame.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm guessing that's available on Amazon.
On Amazon, yes.
Okay. We'll put that in the show notes. Okay. Liz, again, thank you. And my heart goes out to you, but I'm glad you're doing the good work now.
Thank you so much.
At least somebody's trying to make a difference. So
yes, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your success story and having the bravery to share the hard parts of your story as well. So we appreciate all of that, your openness, your honesty, and we appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you're both doing as well. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Once again, we want to thank Elizabeth so much for coming on the show, for having the bravery to share her story, her experience, but also we want to thank her for sharing her knowledge and trying to educate us in the signs to look for and the things that we should be doing to do our part in helping to prevent and report human trafficking.
Melody, this was our first human trafficking story, the full story. As you know, there was somebody who had a double split hybrid story. I particularly got triggered on this one. And for any of the audience that listens to our show, you know that I have this thing about law enforcement or politicians or our government officials so I just told you this right before we started recording. In my county, where I live, they just passed a law that we can no longer wear COVID-type paper masks or cloth masks in public, that they're concerned about criminals using them to commit crimes. So you can wear it if you have a religious exemption, or if you do have COVID, or you're suspected, whatever, you can get a doctor's note. But if a cop stops you and you don't have a valid reason, you can be ticketed or fined. Really? This is what my county is focusing on? And this isn't just something that just was on the news this morning. They've been talking about it, debating it, going to town hall meetings for weeks. what is going on about helping these cult survivors and victims of Liz's story. She was in and out of prison 6 or 7 times, foster homes. Nobody recognized that she had a problem, that she was a victim, that she was not willingly doing this. She had no choice. She didn't know. From the age of 4, she was raped, and it just blows my mind that the law enforcement have, or I keep saying law enforcement, and I'm a friend of law enforcement. I don't want them to think that I'm coming down on them, but it is our elected officials, and there's an election coming up, and some of the insults that they're passing up, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, because this is the anonymous Andrew side of me that gets angry. So
that's okay, Andrew. I hear exactly what you're saying. I mean, and I think, Liz is doing what needs to be done, which is educating people.
She is.
And she's being an advocate. She's giving hope to other survivors. She's being proactive. She wrote her book. She created that foundation. She's doing the things that she can do, the things that are within her power. But obviously, yes, it would be, in a perfect world, would we have somebody with more power doing more? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be nice if somebody was recognizing this as a big enough issue to put it at the front of a political platform? I think that would be great.
I'm going to call out Netflix and Amazon and A&E and HBO and all the Hulu and all the streaming networks that are now jumping on the cult bandwagon. Let's jump on the human trafficking bandwagon and start doing documentaries. I think Liz's story, the book she wrote, somebody should make that into either a movie or a docu-movie and get her story out there. And
I think that would be great.
I am a little worried about going forward, about hearing more human trafficking.
Oh, yeah.
I get
it's a
passionate.
Lot to absorb.
Yeah, yes. I get very passionate and angry. And for those who listen to my weekend rants, I can go off. And I do that sometimes for entertainment purposes and just to get people to listen. But now, this is not me being, trying to grandstand and get on my soapbox. This is stupid. This is absolutely stupid. And what this woman had to endure for 26 years, that's 1/4, hopefully she lives a long life, of her life. That was that she was a drug addict and raped and she has
a very compelling story that does stir up emotion and want you to create some sort of action and want you to have something changed. It's inspiring. And
to your point that she is doing something about it, she opened up some sort of organization, and it's a 501c, and she's helping people, and she's going onto the streets, and she's helping victims, and they call her the purse lady. All of that brings tears to my eyes, because that means that remember the story she told, that a woman came to bail her out of jail, but she said, now you're going to come work for me, because that woman was a victim. But instead of Liz becoming the next madam, she became an advocate and is doing something about it.
She broke the cycle.
She broke the cycle.
Because she could have done the same thing that woman did, and she could have started doing that to other women, and she didn't. She chose a different route, and she chose to better herself, better her community, and what she's doing for other survivors and current victims is amazing. It's amazing and inspiring.
Okay, I can only imagine what's coming down the road, but I'm ready. So thank you to Liz for that very much. Really, go ahead.
What I did forget, Andrew, I forgot my notes that have all my other stuff on it for the outro.
Okay, so to the audience, Melody's internet went out, so she's outside on her porch doing the outro. So here, thank you for tuning in to Cultimatum. Your support is greatly appreciated. Please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on platforms like Apple, Spotify, and don't forget to follow, share, and keep listening to all our latest episodes. You could show your support by joining our Facebook group under the name Cultimatum Podcast. And Melody, if you want to say that you can find us on TikTok, social media.
You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
And Pinterest.
Oh,
Yeah.
Pinterest. Yep.
But, although I don't know why we went on Pinterest, but I think that was my idea. If you are a cult or human traffic survivor and you'd like to share your story with us, please feel free to contact us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com. And Melody, you say that ex-members looking for additional support can join
a cult escape and recovery group on Facebook.
There you go. And if you're interested in hearing me rant more on my show, you can head over to the Anonymous Andrew podcast, Life and the Choices We Make. And
Okay.
Melody, your tagline is?
Yes. Well, first I'm going to say thank you for saving my butt, Andrew. But then I'm going to say stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you're not alone.
Okay. Everybody, we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.